and welcome to episode 40 of the CIS and Senteon webinar series, a deep dive into the CIS benchmarks. So episode 40 of only 41. We are almost completely done with all of the settings to harden workstations. So Rich, man, 40 weeks, we're going on a year of knowing each other and seeing each other every single week.
Yeah, I love it. It's been a great experience, and I hope our viewers have gotten something out of it too. I think they have. We've gotten a lot of replays, that's for sure.
That's definitely true, and all of the replays of the episodes are either on LinkedIn or YouTube. And I've heard good things. It's really cool seeing the college kids even watch some of these webinars and have
Thousands of
takeaways.
replays.
Yeah, but today we have a very exciting topic. We're transitioning to the personalization features of Windows for this episode and our season finale next week. After that, we will be getting into browser hardening. So that might kick off while Rich is sailing away, but hopefully we can kick off on a good time frame. But this week's guest, we have Tim Schnur. Welcome, brother. Longtime friend at this point. I've gotten to know you pretty personally over the last, also, I guess, year. I've really got to know people.
Definitely.
But really excited to have you on the show, hear about your input. I know you have really almost a non-traditional pathway into cybersecurity, really starting a lot with the IP background, data privacy. So really excited to just kind of hear your takeaways and your experience. And then as we dive into these settings, your input on them. But Tim, if you don't mind kicking off, just introduce yourself and who you are, and I guess why you're so interested in cybersecurity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for having me. Zach, I think we met a year and a half ago, Pitch It, ConnectWise incubator cohort, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, my background, came out of college, spent some years in the hedge fund world, finance. I was working at a company and they acquired an intellectual property brokerage. So one of the best jobs I ever had. I was telling Zach how we used to have auctions at the Rosewood Sandhill in Palo Alto down the road in Menlo Park there. So
very cool.
It was a lot of fun, auctioning off inventor portfolios to big tech companies. Got a lot of experience there. That market kind of died. Worked at the Big Four for a while, IP strategy. And somehow it's just kind of like, because cybersecurity's growth year over year has been 20%, at least at that Big Four company.
That's crazy.
Every year, last 10, 15 years. So that, hey, Tim, we need you to kind of work, PM this project. We were doing a big project on, kind of like IP correlation. Mm-hmm. Not IP, not intellectual property, but IP, that MSP, the MSPs now. So very similar to kind of what Wes built and sold, like Perch, using like elk stack and trying to build an elk stack for big banks and big companies to use, but not have to build it on their own. So we're trying to build like almost a multi-tenant version of that. Funny enough, we're talking about MSPs. So got involved in that, and then I got involved in a couple other projects. It slowly kind of moved away from IP, and company called Fort Mesa, which Zach was, I think, on the roundtable last week.
Shout out to the Fort Mesa guys. Thanks for also being an advocate for CIS, and obviously.
Yeah, I was on. That was a great session. I listened in.
Awesome. It's good to see all these vendors talking about CIS. Obviously, we do this weekly, but it's cool to see other vendors also bring this up. I mean, it's becoming more and more talked about. But yeah, Tim, awesome, because you were there early with Fort Mesa, right?
Yeah, Fort Mesa, great.
So it's pretty interesting. I mean, Matt was basically, Fort Mesa was serving or working not in the channel. It was working with kind of almost enterprise direct, which is a tough place to be. They had quite a bit of clients. I don't think a lot of them are kind of gone through the years. A lot of work was like SOC 2 preparation, things like that. And coming from big company world, I hadn't even heard of CIS. And then Matt explained it to me, and I was like, why isn't everyone using this? Like, so I was like, a bunch of experts take all the data, hang out in a room and argue about like, what's the best way to like protect the company. I'm like, sounds like,
we already did that.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting that you hadn't heard of it, because you did have a background in really entering it. And I'm curious, Rich, I mean, we obviously serve primarily the MSP space, me and you. In the enterprise world, I mean, how how popular is CIS in that, I guess, segment of the market? Is it
Oh,
really just, yeah,
it's extremely. If you take a look at, I mean, we have literally thousands of members that, and what a member means is they've purchased a CIS Secure Suite membership, which gives them access to um, our benchmarks in derivative formats in our scanning tool called Syscat Pro and a bunch of other stuff, which is really cool. So we have thousands of people that have an annual subscription, and if you looked at the Fortune 500, I would say we have 80%, maybe 90% of those organizations are current CIS Secure Suite members. And and it varies on what people will actually do with their membership, but you can bet they're using our guidance in some fashion at least.
yeah. So that's awesome you came across it, Tim. But yeah,
Yeah.
please go on.
Yeah. So Matt, was really like looking to move into the MSP world, multi-tenant GRC, government risk and compliance. Like compliance is not 90%. 2 years ago, you wouldn't even hear NIST or CIS like at a channel conference, right? I mean, I was joking about. I remember finally they were talking about identify, protect, detect, respond, like, and that was like a big thing. But CIS, like, relatively unknown in the channel for sure, and it was crazy, right? Because it's such a good fit. It's very prescriptive. It's very technical. So a lot of Fortbase's kind of like basic GRC kind of like roadmaps were built on CIS. They had a lot of the other ones, right? I mean, like I said,
Yeah.
big company. I was used to ISO and NIST, but CIS, like, which Rich, as you said, upstate New York. I think that's where the headquarters is, right? Yeah. So Fort Mesa is based in Albany, New York, or kind of
That's
near it.
where the CIS headquarters are.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
like I said, like those roadmaps were great, really easy to build, really easy to, the IG1, IG2, IG3 were great. So it just, I think that the early success of that Ford Mesa platform really kind of can be put back to CIS benchmarks and CIS standard.
There's really a big business for MSPs to help operationalize the CIS guidance. And ultimately, that's sort of the origin of Senteon. I mean, it's exactly what they do. They take the CIS very prescriptive benchmark guidelines and make them easier to operationalize, to put them into action, to send out those configurations and monitor them over time, which is what compliance is all about. I mean,
Yeah.
having that continual view into your environment and that level of control that Senteon brings really goes a long way for compliance in general. Auditors love CIS benchmarks. If you have, and Tim, I know you work a lot in the financial industry, which is highly regulated.
Yep.
If you can demonstrate that you are following the CIS controls framework, and we can give you tools to help measure your maturity level, and if you can demonstrate your configurations are following the CIS benchmarks, which all the auditors recognize because they tick off many boxes for compliance frameworks, it makes those audits in demonstrating your compliance much easier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. A big thing too. So, I mean, 2, 3 years ago, that jump from CIS 7 to CIS 8 was really interesting. I think it really highlighted a lot of the impact that COVID had, right? And working from home, and there's like a cool diagram that has like CIS 7 and how like a bunch of controls kind of fell down.
Yeah.
Some moved up. So
that was the first time I saw that last week, and I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
we talked about that with Fort Mesa.
Mhm.
How the controls didn't necessarily go away; they might have been, but the order of importance, which is really something that we pride in the CIS controls by breaking them up into implementation groups. We try to make a roadmap that's easy to follow and it's prioritized. So if you tick off those first ones, those are going to be your greatest defenses. And it's amazing if you can get through IG1 in terms of the CIS controls. you will have protected yourself from like 86% of the common threats out in the landscape today. So it really is a powerful framework.
Yeah, and it really shows that agility, I think, right? Because a lot of the other frameworks just are still the same, haven't been updated. So
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a
NIST is
problem.
great. I wouldn't say a bad thing about any framework. They're all great. Here at CIS, what we try to do though is make it easier to follow and measure your maturity level along the path. NIST doesn't really give you a guideline of where to start, and people get confused on where they should really begin and where the finish line is as well, for that matter. And we try to lay that out in a logical way that will provide you the best protection possible.
Yep, very much. And yeah, so that's really cool how you were introduced through Fort Mesa and got into this GRC space from what you were working with before, right? I mean, that isn't really a direct line path. And obviously transitioning Fort Mesa to that MSP market, you had a high influence on that. But I mean, Tim, what's going on today? I mean, we were talking about in the pre-show, a lot of these regional events starting to network. I mean, what are you up to now?
Yeah, so I mean, I worked at a data discovery, data classification firm for a little bit. The next step really is, I'm looking at kind of bringing that really tight constraints security. I think you would see working at a bank, working at an insurance company. Like, how do you bring that level of security down, make it affordable for small businesses, like in the New York City regional area, which most of them are regulated, as you mentioned, Zach, like banks and lawyers and accountants. So just trying to work that out. Do a little bit of eCISO work for a fintech firm that I know of, but they actually are in they're regulated as well because they're in money services. So,
but you're heading down this entrepreneurship path, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, it's going okay. And
it's scary.
Yeah,
well, it's such scary. I mean, I love what you're doing, Tim, because it is so critical. I mean, taking your enterprise level experience and being able to put that into effect for a small or even a medium-sized business that hasn't had that kind of perspective view that you have through your experience is really critical. And a lot of those organizations, is we all know, and sometimes they don't know, they are very vulnerable for attack. That we talk about it a lot. Obviously the big fish are always being targeted by the bad guys, but so are the mom and pops these days. So are the small businesses. So it's even more critical than ever for those types of businesses to be able to work with someone like yourself for an affordable solutions that provide high value protection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And talking about CIS, right? It's a great roadmap.
It's affordable for everyone, and even free in a
lot
of instances. You can download most of our IP for free.
Yeah, and right. I mean, this path of entrepreneurship, obviously, I mentioned this briefly ago, but a lot of these regional shows and local events, we always hear about these big shows, the Ride of Boom, the IT Nations, what's coming up, DEF CON, RSA coming up in May, right? I don't really get to hear a lot of our guests come on and talk about these more local events. Could you kind of share what you've been experiencing? Has it been positive? Are they security local events? Are they just general? What's been going on in that?
Industry focused? Are you doing industry focused things as well? I'm interested in that.
Yeah, not particularly. No, it's interesting because a lot of our colleagues or acquaintances or people we know in the channel, they're going to channel events consistently. So it's great. I've had a little more time this year. Gone to at least 10 events, maybe 15 events in the city. Small business events. There's always some
just general business events.
General business events, like they'll have some security agenda. Some of them I'm fortunate enough to speak at. But really, even some of the bigger MSPs will have events that are kind of open, and they're really just trying to educate their their clientele. So it's great to go to these like smaller events. There's just tech events. Like I'm going to one that's called like Tech New York, which is mostly startups. But it's great to get out to these events. If you know someone there, Isaka IS2 is another one that, like, regionally they all have chapters, so they host events. These are just great, and there's probably somebody in the channel already. They can introduce you to other people around. So I'm fortunate enough to be in a big city, and it's great to kind of get out there and network and just meet people. It's interesting as well. Like a lot of these entrepreneurs kind of have some kind of relationship with the MSP or IT channel. And they're all kind of like, oh, like, what's your experience there? So it's just trading experiences and stories and kind of angles on how, their business may get involved.
You
So
can really learn a lot in those environments and hopefully find some business, right?
yeah.
Side benefit. That's cool though, because you said something really key. Finding someone that you do recognize or having a friend who can then introduce you to more of the group, right? And I imagine as you do become more accustomed, you can become that person. And the people at these networking groups, I imagine, want to introduce new members or new attendees to other people. So, I mean, would you recommend people to do that? Like, I imagine that's a good strategy, right?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to experiment with things. I love it when someone posts on LinkedIn, and most people do, kind of like, hey, I'm going to this event, or, so you kind of like already have a little bit of a rough framework or schedule of people you want to run into and connect with or reconnect with. So that's great as well. I mean, we're very kind of like public, I guess, in the MSP world or MSSP world, like on kind of what we're up to, where we're going.
We don't mind giving away our location. That's no. Free information.
Yeah.
I love that. Thanks for kind of shedding some light on that. That is something I personally want to start doing in my area to see if just kind of what experience I get, and I'll be sure to share
Switching
that.
to big conferences, CIS is a sponsor at RSA today or this year, and we're super excited about that.
That was where I first met you in person, man. We'll have to update our cover photo.
Yeah. Do another live stream from your apartment.
We can do it from your booth at RSA,
or
brother.
The booth. Yeah, we're making big plans around that. So the small events are awesome and very high value, but we're super excited for RSA, making plans around that already. So
that'll be a really cool one.
Yeah.
And Tim, I'm kind of diving into a little bit more technical aspects. As the audience hopefully knows, we will get into the settings in the second half of the conversation. Sure. But something that's near and dear to you is data privacy with your patent background and whatnot. Could you just kind of share? I think you released like a white paper recently. Could you just kind of share an overview of data privacy and what you're seeing going on and why that's important for the MSP market?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So put a white paper out. It was on LinkedIn. It was also on Medium. Really focused on malicious insider, right? So they talk about insider threat quite often. And there's a lot of overlap with non-competes and just the relationship you have with employers, right? And really focused it's interesting coming from this IP world. Like patents used to patent, and the patent office would be publicly available, so everyone knew about it. And everything's shifting kind of like this confidential, like trade secrets, whether it's an official trade secret or not. Everyone knows like the Coca-Cola in the vault thing, right? But there's everything you kind of do in a business, like your strategy, your finances, the relationships you have, the customers you have. This is all information that you don't want getting out. Most regulators care about sensitive data, like the customers, like social security number, healthcare. Mm-hmm. You get in trouble for that, but you actually don't really get in trouble by regulators from like some insider taking much more valuable information, like I said, strategies and decks and
process potentially.
Right. So it's really becoming interesting on security, getting focused on that malicious insider. If you ask a small business owner, like, you ever had an employee like walk away with something that was really valuable, and like chances are they're going to say yes, right?
Or they just don't know.
Yeah,
right? It's not like that's that uncommon of a thing.
It's almost worse not knowing.
Right, and it's actually pretty common there's a lot of litigation in the financial world with employees leaving and poaching employees, and what did they take with them, and they're really careful about what files they access. Did they try to send things out? Zach was on. We did a webinar recently on browser security, and browser is a great place to enforce malicious insider defenses. So it's a big thing. It falls into this kind of like least trust, zero trust, right? Like minimum access. A lot of the new modern security techniques are really helpful, right? Like data discovery, data classification, figuring out where things go and tracking them, who has access to them.
Once you know what data is really critical within the organization, you have to know what you need to protect, right? And then you can take those defensive measures which can vary, right, based upon its classification. So
Yeah,
that's really important work.
I want to shout out what you said, least trust, zero trust, because I think that's always a funny term to throw around, because there's no true thing as zero trust. There has to be some level of trust in order to use that device, So I like how you called out least trust.
Zero trust. The power's off, and it's got
it doesn't exist. Anyway,
it sounds like a great white paper. Can we throw a link in the chat?
Yeah, if you have that around, definitely feel free. You can do it now, because I'm going to keep tossing questions at you, as a good host would. But I'm curious, with this background and relating it to MSPs, I've actually heard stories of where a MSP security engineer, leaves that job, takes a job with another MSP, and the previous MSP, maybe they leave on bad terms, whatever that is, actually goes after that security engineer as if they stole IP, because a lot of MSPs do consider their security stack, hey, this is unique to us. We're the only one with this combination of vendors. This is our IP. So I've heard of MSPs actually going after their security engineers. I mean, is that justified? I mean, do you have any experience in this? Is there any light you can shed to that happening?
What was the original employment contract, right? Like, so there are a lot of tools and aspects of your relationship with an employee. You usually sign something like all the IP is like the ownership of the company and things like that, right? So non-competes, which are really falling apart, like certainly in New York and California, right? Like they don't really exist anymore. But that little signature that you said, like the IP is the ownership of the company. And we're using all these great new cybersecurity tools to track like access and logging and who's pulling files. Like, you've got a mountain of evidence potentially against that employer. Like, did they take something? Did they send it to their Dropbox or Gmail or whatnot? So that's the short story of it. Like, the long story is, like, culturally, do they know that like they can't take that with them? Like, you're getting paid to work at a company and you're getting, a handsome salary to do a job. So, what's that expectation? What's that? It's a lot. It's really a series of carrots and sticks, right? Like they understand, like, if they do great things, and how do you get them to create innovation? And that's what, some of the paper talks about, like these innovation programs at tech companies, but it doesn't have to be that, it doesn't have to be a tech company. Every company has proprietary strategic information. So how do you protect it? How do you incentivize them to kind of like do the right thing? So you don't get in these skirmishes that no one wins, right? Like,
there is no winner. I mean, you're just out a bunch of money, and the lawyers win, right? If they do take it to court. But yeah, I don't think it's the outcome anyone wants, whether it's for brand, because, MSPs do need to protect their business. I'm not short-sighting that, right? But at the same time, your image of going after employees could be damaging, right? If that employee did do something malicious, insider threat, steal IP, then of course it's justified. But that's just kind of something I've heard more than once in the last few months, and it was kind of catching me off guard. So thanks for sharing some input on that.
Yeah, so I mean, non-competes really shouldn't be necessary if those kind of employee contracts and the training and their signature, like, basically recognizing that the IP is not theirs, right? Like, so if you start that, if you establish that and kind of have a culture of, protecting data and confidentiality, and like I said, this all overlaps and goes extremely well with cybersecurity, and the CIS controls are, as we said, that big jump from 7 to 8, CIS 7 to CIS 8, right? Like identity and asset inventory came or top of the stack, right?
Yep.
Exactly what we're talking about here. So, yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
And just kind of, I guess, put the bow on this with your data privacy background. Are you noticing anything trend-wise, whether with increase of more patents coming out or it's more trade secrets? What are you kind of noticing in that respect?
Yeah, so I mean, really big trend. So we did great. Like I said, we used to have these patent auctions, Sand Hill Road, early 2010s. Kind of that market is gone. Patents are worthless. I don't want to say that too loud. I guess I just said it. But
you're live on a webinar, but that's okay.
it just patents like.
Why is that, Tim? I don't understand.
People, because you talk to a patent attorney and their job is for them to prosecute patents, right? So like, they're like, oh, you can get a patent on that. Just because you got a patent on something doesn't mean it's like going to have legs, and it's a ticket to a lawsuit. A lawsuit you're probably going to lose just because a lot of the way the court systems are set up, it's like very difficult to chase a giant, right? Like, and basically get some kind of meaningful like reward out of it that won't get overturned. So even a lot of the big verdicts that you've heard about have been overturned. I can't think, there's a rule that you can't have an injunction. I don't know if this is probably before Zach's. You're a little young for this, but Rich remembers the BlackBerry being shut down.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So like, those days are long gone. It's a lot of the world is moving to trade secrets. It's cheaper. You don't have to prosecute it. You just keep it confidential from the beginning. Like I said, all falling into this kind of like, you need to have very good cybersecurity to kind of sit alongside a good trade secrets program, which trade secrets like really just is all kind of proprietary, confidential information. So patents, they're, on Shark Tank, they're like, oh, do you have a patent? But like,
increases the value.
Mark Cuban actually knows patents very, very well. And he actually has an association against stupid patents. Like it's something like some domain. You can look this up for Mark Cuban. He knows well enough that like patents are, their days are gone. But if you are a big international company,
I learned something. That's very interesting.
If you're big international company, like you have to patent like thousands of patents and the way of writing claims and talking about prior art, and you have to like internationally, like if you actually want to actually get somebody, chances are you're better off suing them in Germany or like Korea or the UK. Wow. Than down in South Texas, which is where all the U.S. patent litigation happens. So
interesting stuff. Yeah, I said, you're one of the first with that type of background to join the show. So thanks for letting me go a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah. We definitely let me know if you hear of anyone who thinks they want to patent something.
I love it. We do have about 7 settings today. So before we do make that transition, I want to talk about one other trend that I think you're seeing, and this might be more specific to you, but with the management of Google Workspace, Chromebooks, and whatnot, obviously Windows is this dominant force. I will give CIS a shout out. They do have, I believe, Chromebook benchmarks. I think they even have Google Workspace benchmarks, right? So definitely have Google Chrome benchmarks, which we talk about with browser hardening. But Tim, any trends you're seeing with Chromebooks on the Google side of technology? Is there something MSPs should start maybe furthering their understanding, or it's too early to really care too much?
I think it's great to have an understanding. As you said, like 95 to 99% of MSPs are in Microsoft world. The ones that aren't, like, I guess somewhat of exposure maybe in like the education space with like Google in the classroom.
Yep.
But I love it. We work with Google specifically. A client of mine, it's great, right? And a lot of fintech, Lyft, like I don't know if Uber, like Airbnb, like a lot of these companies came up in like the Google kind of using Google as the OS. So Google has incredible verticality of like the stack, like SSO, logging, password management, passkeys. Like they're very advanced and very kind of forward leaning on these new things like passkeys. Do you follow a guy named Jason Rebholz? He's talking about a new, he talks about authentication a lot, but he's a VC, so at a big insurance company. Big, great follow in the channel. But he, like Google's always coming out with these kind of cutting edge things where they're like a couple months, maybe a quarter ahead of kind of Microsoft releasing them. But it's they really do put it together a very good package. Zach, you were on the browser show, and like,
Yep.
Google's all about the browser, right? Like the Chromebook is basically just a browser on a machine with a display, right? So
That is really
the
cool.
browser, like you're in pretty good shape. So
Yeah. And we do, even Senteon, a partner of ours, we have someone who primarily services Chromebooks. He has a subset of Windows, which is funny to say, a subset from his Chromebooks are Windows.
Is that an educational
He
client?
does.
Yeah.
He's actually a side business is his MSP, but his full-time job is working for a school. So he
Okay.
also has his side business of MSP for schools, which is Chromebooks. So very, very interesting trend. Thanks for shedding some light on that. But we are at the halfway point. So let's transition to some of these settings. We're going to talk about, like I said, these personalization settings. So let's just pull up the MITRE attack technique slide. This will be interesting. Usually when Rich and I have this slide, there's like 6 or 7 different MITRE attack techniques I like to talk about. But realistically, these personalization settings, I mean, the title here is system and notification settings. A lot of what we're going to talk about is more end user, that person against using the machine just for customability, not so much security, but still all about reducing the attack surface. So Tim, really quick, if you don't mind calling out these MITRE attack techniques and just introducing at a high level what they are and maybe why a bad actor would want to exploit these.
Yeah, no. So a lot of these slides, like we're going to go through here, are not new or not like very modern.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are protections that have been around probably, I'd say, since the 90s almost. Maybe a couple of them are, I guess, innovative or new things. But yeah, so from the MITRE attack framework, these are things that are, and also from the risk management perspective, like we like to talk about, like deter, prevent, right?
Yeah.
Like
these are like the low-hanging attack techniques that minimizing your attack surface and having these settings hardened really prevent the chance of these being successful, right?
Yeah, really those first two, and like a risk management perspective, the deter and prevent, right?
Yep.
And as you said, like I don't like to use this term, but like they like, if you make it idiot proof, like you can't get attacked by a phishing attacker, right? Like, it's like the buttons are like, it doesn't allow you to do that, right? Like
you're reducing the attack surface.
That's right.
And a lot of double confirms too. And we'll get into this next season when we talk about the browser hardening, but hardening your browser can be a massive defense layer to phishing attacks, right? Because before anything's allowed to execute, before any download, it's like a double, triple confirm. There's additional scanning, which can increase friction between that end user and the browser, right? The place they work. But it's all about that risk reward, right? So now that's really good. I mean, a couple of these on here, authentication process, which we'll go through some of these settings, but obviously the bad actor can make it so they're authenticated and look real. I mean, you just talked about this with identity, right? It's going to help them get to the attack sources they want to do, and disk wipe, making sure the data stays where it's supposed to stay. You don't want to allow that stuff to leak out or get out. So,
or modify defenses, right? The other one. I mean, these are what MITRE are saying. Without these proper settings, these are the potential ways that you can have issues. So I always love the MITRE attack slide. You know that.
But awesome. So let's just head over to this next slide here. And Rich, I'll give you a chance to kind of shout out. We have definitely a shorter presentation here just because these are the personalization settings. They are very straightforward, which is still important. Tim will kind of talk about why. But Rich, do you mind just giving a very quick overview? I just talked about with Fort Mesa, the CIS benchmarks are not necessarily the controls, but they 100% feed into the controls, right? So could you just really give an overview of what these benchmarks are and what their goal is?
Happy to, Zach. Thank you. So security professionals worldwide rely on Center for Internet Security, or CIS, content in multiple areas, but I'm going to talk about two, just a baseline for better understanding for everybody. So the first area where people really leverage CIS content is the CIS controls. And the CIS controls are a policy framework that is broken up into implementation groups and tested against the MITRE ATT&CK framework to protect you against the most common threats in the cybersecurity landscape. So there's 157 controls altogether, and we've broken them up into implementation groups, which give you a logical way where to start and continue down the path until you complete those. So basic cybersecurity hygiene dictates that all organizations should reach minimally implementation group 1 from the CIS policy, CIS controls framework. So it's really a nice set of IP. It gives you something that's logical to follow and will give you incredible defense overall. And it's something that large businesses follow and something that small and medium businesses can also do very effectively, and sometimes help with folks like Tim and the MSPs that we have out there that have either integrated some of our controls IP into their solutions, or can just help you put this into effect in your organization. So the other parts, that's step 1. That's the CIS controls. That's the policy framework. And it's really something every organization needs to have, is a policy framework. I'm going to recommend you use CIS, but there's many others that are out there as well. And so just get after one, make sure it's CIS, and follow it.
I appreciate that introduction on it. Again, these CIS benchmarks is all about reducing the attack surface and making sure those MITRE techniques are just
So let me differentiate
likely.
benchmarks, though. So
Go
what
ahead.
are the CIS benchmarks? So those are the CIS controls. That's the policy framework. So what CIS benchmarks are is they are a very prescriptive guide for technology settings within a specific tech or platform. So we're talking about Windows in this particular session, but CIS has benchmarks for all kinds of different technologies, for routers, firewalls, network devices, mobile devices, operating systems. And you can go onto our website, and what you will find is you can download our CIS benchmarks and see what these configurations look like, and literally use them in your environment. The challenge is the PDF file for the Windows benchmark is like 1,400 pages. So, it can be a challenge for someone to put up that PDF on one screen and a GPO editor in the other screen and try to affect all of those settings without making errors and keeping those in sync over time. So that's where Zach can help out. But anyways, the CIS benchmarks are different from the CIS controls in that they are a very prescriptive guide to specific settings for the tech you're working with. And we develop those through a worldwide consensus process. And what I mean by that is CIS, we have a dev team and so forth, but we work on a draft. We create a draft benchmark with the vendor that is publishing that tech. And then we manage a group of worldwide experts that come up with these settings, and we bring that group to consensus on what the most appropriate security settings are without breaking workflow and things like that before we publish the benchmark. And the all of these settings are tested against the MITRE framework and put through rigorous testing to make sure that the CIS benchmark is, keeping up with the threats that are out in the real world. So, and we continually update them, and that's my story.
Absolutely. I mean, my favorite part is just how long these benchmarks are, because for me, with what we do, we automate it so you don't need to read that, right? I've brought that printed out version on stage and just had a 1,500 page box. And, I said, does anyone want to read this on their flight home, right? No one has the time to do that. But that's why we have webinar series like this and experts like Tim to introduce these settings. So with all that said, thanks for the introduction on the benchmarks. Let's get into this first setting. So enable screensaver is set to enabled. So Tim, this is a little different than like an inactivity timeout, right? This isn't going to lock them out of the machine. This is just simply screensaver, right? So could you introduce this setting and why it's a best practice to have enabled?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a little bit of running joke, certainly in our network. Maybe a guy over at Tax8, he talks about finding people and taking pictures of their,
First name Matt,
laptops left open
last
in the
name Lee.
airport. Yeah. Yeah. Hey, just watch my laptop over here while I go get a Starbucks, right? It's wide open. Don't worry about it. So
Matt's famous for that.
What's funny is Matt wouldn't even be able to take those photos, even if it was just screensaver, right? If the screensaver's on, you don't know that it's unlocked necessarily. So if people just had the screensaver on, the machine could still be open when they move the mouse when they're back, but the screensaver's not even on.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So you're less likely to check, right? So, the big four company I work for as well had this wasn't one, but the privacy glass. So like you can't see like from an angle.
Yeah.
Those were pretty common. I think they were required for a good like kind of bunch of consultants as well. So
I feel like I don't see those on airplanes as much anymore. You saw them a lot for a while and not so much these days. I don't know why.
Right, because now like the OLED screens you can see them from like 4 seats over. So I don't know. But yeah, so I mean, I think this one's pretty obvious. Just that screensaver shutting down, and I don't want to spoil the other one that kind of directly connects to this one, right? Like the lock screen. So
we could go to this next setting here right now. And I made the point of emphasizing this on this setting. We can change that slide really quick. So, when that screensaver is enabled, that's one thing. You move the mouse and you're already back in, but there's an additional setting. Again, all these GPOs, all these CIS benchmarks are kind of intermingled, right? If you have one, that's good, but if you have the other, it's better. And this is one of those examples. So CIS goes to the next step to say, hey, you got to have the screensaver, but you also need to enable the password protect the screensaver so that they do need to put it in when they're back. But Tim, I kind of explained this slide, but in your own words, if you don't mind elaborating more on this.
Yeah. So I mean, there's obviously levels to this. Depends if there's like a biometric, right? Like I know we're talking Microsoft, like a Surface, or even I guess they don't make Microsoft phones anymore, but
they tried it. I don't know if they're still out there. Probably are somewhere.
So obviously the password protection, the level of multi-factor, every time you go into the screensaver, there's levels here, case by case, like what's your level of friction on the user, which is very important, right? So how much can they tolerate, and how important is the data they're handling from a sensitivity perspective? So
that's a really good call out, Tim.
Great point.
It can very much depend on that type of employee, that employee's role, and what type of data they're working with, right? Because as an MSP, you're catering to multiple different enterprise clients or SMB clients, and all of them have a different network. All of them have different standards, right? So just because CIS says this is best practice, if it's causing enough friction and it is determined we can accept that risk for this employee, it's okay to have this type of exception. Like, is that the right way to go about this stuff?
100%, right? I mean, like, and then you'll see like computers like in a hotel, right? And they'll be like, oh, the business center's got that computer over there. It's like either the screen's on or you just got to punch the mouse a little bit and it'll open up. So.
There's always exceptions to everything. It's part of that defense in depth. If a user is isolated off on a LAN without any, particularly important information, not as critical. But if I'm an admin person and I have access to the identity management system or database access and everything, let's maybe have a 2-factor for that guy, right? So part of that defense in depth, and that can vary by user, and exceptions do happen.
Yep.
All right, let's review this next setting here. So screensaver timeout is set to enabled, 900 seconds or fewer, but not 0. So again, this is intertangling. We're all talking about screensaver, but this is taking it to a next level and saying, hey, if this is screensaver mode for so long, it's now going to lock out. Tim, why is that important to make sure this is enforced?
Yeah. So I mean, if it's set for too long, like 3 hours, you walk away in the airport, like we said, 3 hours. Like, what's the appropriate level of time for it to time out? It can't be too frictionless, as we just said. Like, can't be like 10 seconds. You look away, you like answer a question, you're like, oh no,
That's my password again.
yeah. No. So, what's the right level? And that that'll vary. Some of the newer, I think, like if your iPhone, like clearly your face is in front of it, like it's going to stay engaged and like not time out. But I don't know if laptops have that like same capability that a smartphone would have. So.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a perfect explanation, right? Screensaver is different than machine and activity timeout, but having both is going to be that defense in depth, making sure things are locked when they're not in use, but understanding what you can handle is critical. So,
yep.
Very cool. This next setting here, I know we were kind of, I was even laughing about it off air. I was like, I don't know what toast notifications are. You taught me a little bit.
Did a Google search.
Did a Google search, right? And that's the best thing about these webinars, right? We talk about over 1,000 different settings, and you don't have to know them all, right? I don't expect, when I onboard a new partner, a new MSP engineer, I don't expect them to know all 1,000 settings that we're changing, right?
What?
That's ridiculous, right? Yeah, go Control F, search the CIS.
I got a toast right there.
There's a toast, right?
Yeah.
So as Tim demonstrated, it's
my
just
front door.
Yep.
Right. So as Tim's demonstrating, right, these are notifications that can appear even though the phone is locked, right? But Tim, explain why we wouldn't want that to be possible.
Yeah, so I mean, for obvious reasons, like you get a sensitive email, even like how about an MFA code, right? That's like a text, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got a 6-digit like fresh MFA, like the phone sitting there. So yeah, obviously sensitive information, sensitive data can be transmitted in those toasts. Anything from emails to, like I said, MFA codes is like worst case scenario. So.
Or social media likes, right? I mean, I don't want.
yeah. It's funny. Funny story about this. Toasts were like the greatest thing because like you used to go out on a Friday night, Saturday night with your friends in New York and like leave your phone in the cab or the Uber, and like you'd be able to communicate like as the phone's locked with like, call this number. Like, I lost my phone in the back of your cab, right? Like,
yeah.
Not so much available as much anymore.
Well,
when I did my Google search,
come on like that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, when I did my Toast Google search, because I wasn't familiar with Toast, what Microsoft told me was Toast is, sending you messages that are intended for user engagement. So this whole idea of Toast is to engage the user, and as Tim clearly pointed out, that could very much include sensitive information, which we don't want to be engaging others with outside of ourselves. So, good thing to keep private.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even in like in a vendor, like so Fort Mesa, like if you enter something, you get an acknowledgement, like I don't know, saved or something like that. At least we called it Toast with our dev team. So
yeah,
I don't know. Yeah, if that's
it's a framework, I think, for sending messages to the user.
Yeah, how wide the term is. Does it have to be like? Does the screen have to be closed or not? So yeah.
Perfect. All right, this next setting here, turn off help experience improvement program. This one's always interesting because I have a gut feeling this is probably sending data back to Microsoft. We've done so many episodes about
I was going to say
sending data back and forth. I know we've already done episodes on this, but that's the thing with these customization settings, right?
They exist so many places.
They exist so many places, right? And if you only, as an MSP, maybe you can only do the top 10 most important, the top 15, right? There's 500 of these recommendations on a workstation. It's very hard to do manually, and making sure they're all off, right? So Tim, if you can just walk us through this setting, are we right when we assume this is sending data to Microsoft they may not need?
Yeah, it's getting even more dangerous, right? Like Copilot, Siri, like some other devices that aren't any kind of like audio assistant, right? Like what kind of data is it picking up that it shouldn't be picking up? So the help experience, like we just don't know what kind of logs and what kind of data is being sent back to the mothership. So
Exactly right. Yeah.
uh,
You don't
yeah,
have control over it. They're kind of grabbing what they want at a point in time.
right.
And so let's not do that.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of these AI things are really kind of putting an emphasis on this specific control. Like, what are you turning the pipe on to go like off the premise? Like that's basically you're basically creating a pipe to something that's not in your security preview. So
Yeah, and AI right now is just such a security privacy
yeah,
black box. We're all figuring it out, right? And I very much expect, and we got our
Robert
friend
jumping in on the chat.
Stuffy
Thank you very
hopping
much
in.
for your
yeah,
experiences.
But I definitely want to chat just this quick comment on the AI black box of security. I do anticipate, right? I don't know this for sure, but I am expecting that as these GPOs in Windows 11 matures even further, there will probably be settings directly related to AI communication that you will be able to harden, right? That's a prediction. But let's toss this comment back from Stuffy on screen. I didn't get a chance to read it. So he mentioned when working on Gov sites, we were required to lock screens when leaving the workstation. So at any point, if you were out of sight of the workstation, it had to be locked, right? There's no screensaver option. So that's even more secure than what CIS recommends, right?
yep. Yeah, no, and I had a job like in anti-money laundering, and you could look at very specific really personal details on like financials and things like that. So that loaner computer was like the second you like stepped away from it, it was it locked up and smoke came out, right? Like,
Yeah, I would add to Robert's comment that so if, obviously if you're in a government site, you need to follow that policy. Also, if you're within any like a 10-mile radius of Matt Lee, you definitely want to follow that.
yeah,
No, I love that one. Thanks for the shout out there, Stuffy. Good to hear those real stories. That's what I really love about these webinar series and having our guests in the audience. We only have one more setting for you, Tim. Let's or I'm sorry, we have two more. I was on the next slide on my own instance, but this next one here, do not preserve zone information in file attachments is set to disabled. Again, I want to shout this out. Do not and disabled double negatives. GPOs are very confusing the way they phrase them. So this CIS is recommending there is a preserve zone. Tim, I'm not super familiar with that term. Have you seen this one? Can you shed some light as to what preserve zone means?
I think it's pretty similar to the last one, either caching or pulling. The last control or benchmark we talked about was basically is that data being is it being saved in some area that might be sensitive that can be pulled away or pushed away to an area that is not in the security program's purview. So those files, right? Like, and from a developer perspective, right? Like, think about Senteon, right? Like, you set up a customer, and then the customer's data, like, there's a lot of infrastructure and pipeline for these files to sit in. Are they secured all the way? Like, what happens when the machine's turned off? So so
everything matters. I think one of the other favorite combination of settings, we had a friend, Marty Godsey, on the episode, and we were talking about just power management, resource management. There were 4 different settings, but they were all the same as each other. It just depended if the machine was in, plugged in charging, power saving mode, or just on and not plugged in. But it was the same setting, just
Right.
different instances of how the machine was being used. And just like you said, right, all these settings are just about preserving the integrity of that data, making sure it's not as accessible in ways that it shouldn't be accessed, right? So good overview on this one. Rich, it looked like you were thinking. Did you have more to add on this slide, or should we sweep over the next one?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, brother. All right, one more slide for us. So this last one here is to notify antivirus programs when opening attachments is set to enabled. So anytime I see notify, I always am inclined to think this is something the end client, that end user, is going to see on their screen. Is that the case here, or is this really just telling the antivirus, hey, something is opening, you need to look at this in the background?
I think that one's for Rich, right? Like, why do they use notify?
No, it's not notifying the user. It's sending that file right to the antivirus program,
Right.
For review before launching. So it's an extra layer of defense. When someone launches a file, rather than it dropping its payload, its malicious payload, if it has one. It's going to let the antivirus program kind of do that first and do its checks to make sure the user is protected before getting involved with that file.
Yep. I think that's a perfect overview there. And, settings like this, it may increase the time for that file to open. An end client may get upset, but this is where that engineer, that MSP owner needs to understand what risk tolerance they have. Is this scan worth the extra 3 seconds it takes for the end client to open that file, right? And that's just a discussion they either need to have,
The answer is
one
yes.
way where they tell the client it's this way, or they just need to have that conversation and make the decision that's best for that business.
So, and I wanted to bring this up before too,
Yeah.
and Tim was talking about something else, and I don't remember the exact context, but it was really about awareness, which, is that extra 3 seconds can be annoying. It's a lifetime for some people in today's world. But, if it's explained clearly on, why that lag happens and the importance of it, and the risks that the organization faces, if the wrong payload was executed, then it makes that three seconds have more context and more tenable for the particular individual involved. So it's a lot about awareness. And, Tim was talking about something earlier too, and I was like, yeah, that it's really about awareness.
Yep.
Very cool. So that is all the settings for today. We got about a few minutes left. I always love to just kind of give this time back to the guests. So Tim, we covered a lot of the cybersecurity fundamentals, a lot of these basic personalization, right? But, is there any major trends that you're seeing or anything you really want to just leave the audience with to kind of close out this episode?
So one more thing, I think 2 slides back, we talked about, we started to kind of delve into AI, and I know that's,
please.
We can spend a whole episode on that.
Oh yeah. Series.
A good follow, StackAware, a guy named Walter Hayek posted something about AI and how even non-confidential, non-kind of strategic information can be intelligently combined into insights, right? It's like you take a picture of Zach in a parking lot and you're like, oh, that guy's in Plano, Texas, right? Like, how'd the computer know that, right? Like, so I think this is a lot of these safeguards and benchmarks we talked today are going to get more and more important, just in terms of like, AI is very dangerous, right? Like it can do a lot more than you think it can do, just because it can infer from like limited amounts of information, which I think from a privacy and a data perspective is going to be really important, like going forward. So
I can share some insight from CIS from an end user perspective, which I am as an employee at CIS. AI is not allowed.
Yeah.
Very much makes sense. I think a lot of MSPs will likely be, I know even we did over at Senteon, adopted an AI policy into our handbook, right? So I'd imagine if MSPs aren't doing that yet, that's something that will probably be in their next update of the handbook. But yeah, AI, definitely a big thing. Great closing thoughts there. And like I said earlier, I mean, I do believe that's going to be a trend. I think Microsoft is going to want to integrate that partnership they have with OpenAI further and in Copilot, right? They want to make things better for the user without necessarily thinking about the repercussions. So
that's why they want to collect all your data, Zach.
That's why we don't need to send data to them willingly. Anyway, let's wrapping this up. So this is the second to last episode of the season. Next week, we will be closing out the season with our friend Joshua Copeland. He has since left AT&T and is now the security director of Bose. So it'll be cool to hear his input on that transition from, I guess that's probably Fortune 500 to Fortune 500.
Yeah.
But anyway, interesting to still hear that transition and what it was like. So very excited to have him close out the season with us. I am doing my best to get back onto my CIS Unlocked newsletter releases. It has been very hard to keep up. If you've checked out Senteon recently, we did launch a whole brand new website that is now up, public, and ready for visitors. So with that, wrapping up, Senteon does always provide our LinkedIn information. Please connect with me and Rich. If you do want to compare your own security posture against CIS, that is something Senteon does allow free to do with our solution. Get your free assessment, see where you sit today, see where you can improve. But overall, guys, thank you for being here. Tim, thanks for being a great guest.